Welcome to CIT Today, a podcast that dives into vital mental health topics impacting our community. Join us as members of the Anne Arundel County Police Department's Crisis Intervention Team discuss the crisis response system of care. This system provides community members experiencing a crisis with supportive assistance and connections to resources. Crisis response offers support and assistance to those with substance abuse and mental health challenges. One goal is to focus on redirecting people from the criminal justice system to the behavioral health care system. Come with us as we explore these challenging situations facing families and communities everywhere.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Steve Thomas. I'm joined alongside my co-host, Jen Corbin. On today's show, we're excited to have Anne Arundel County Executive Steuart Pittman. County Executive Pittman was elected Anne Arundel County Executive after his first campaign for public office in 2018. He was re-elected to a second term in office last year. Mr. Pittman was born and raised on his family farm in Davidsonville, and his pledge is to make Anne Arundel County the best place for all by putting communities first. On this episode of CIT Today, the county executive will share some of his personal experiences working with our Crisis Intervention Unit and Anne Arundel County Crisis Response, and his vision for the crisis response system moving forward. Mr. Pittman, thank you for joining us and welcome to CIT Today.
Thank you. It's great to be with you guys. You're my heroes, by the way.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
We appreciate your support. Kind of looking back since 2018 and coming into office, and I know you've learned a lot about the crisis system and kind of what we do in the community. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen the crisis system impact the community and the members?
Yeah, I didn't know what we had until I came into office. And I think my first experience with the two of you was when we asked to be briefed on the response to the Capitol Gazette shooting. And that had happened while I was a candidate for office. And hearing how much you did and how important what you did was, I could only imagine for the people who were impacted, people wondering about their family members in the building and all of that. But also the work that you did with the first responders afterwards. I realized that this was something special. And then when I found out that you won the award for the best crisis response system in the world from the Global Crisis Response, I forget the name of the organization exactly, but that was pretty special too. So I have followed and watched closely and particularly paid attention at budget time to make sure that you have the support you need to continue the work.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Can you talk a little bit, talking about the Capitol Gazette? I think that is the eye-opening piece that really started to draw a lot of attention to our crisis system. Can you talk a little bit about how important it is for police to be integrated in our crisis system, in our crisis system? Because I always go around and I talk a lot at conferences, and I always start with everybody in the U.S. wants to put social workers in police. And we do it a little different here, and that's because of your support and the support of the police chief to put the officers in crisis so that we can be more available to the community that may not want to reach out to the police department through 911. Do you see that being helpful, having the police with us in the crisis system?
Well, absolutely. I mean, for a few reasons. One is, as you say, sometimes people don't go directly to the police department in crisis. They don't necessarily even call 911. Sometimes they call your warm line. Mm-hmm. In fact, more and more and more people are calling the warm line. And that's kind of how we measure both that the word is getting out, but that the need is great. And we've watched that grow. But I've heard stories about and explanations why it's important to have an officer with the clinicians when they go knock on somebody's door. And part of that is safety. They're knocking on a door of a family in crisis. There might be a domestic dispute, and we don't want our clinicians to be put in harm's way. And so that's important. But then those officers are there on the scene watching and learning and being impacted the way the counselors are it's a pretty special group of police officers.
Yeah.
And it's not just the ones who are regularly part of the team, it's the others who get trained now as well, so that they learn what you all are learning. There's a sharing of information and knowledge and heart and empathy and all the things that go along with your work between your counselors and our police officers, and the lines are blurred. The police officers are even dressed, often like they're clinicians. You can't tell the difference, and it's just good for everybody.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point. It's blurring the line, and that's part of, I think, what I'm so proud of in Anne Arundel County is just the community policing that's taking place. And part of that comes from the support of our leadership here and allowing our officers to go out there and not rush from call to call, but to finish the call and do what's right. And I was just talking about that the other day to someone, and they appreciate the fact that they didn't feel rushed and that the officer wasn't hurrying our clinician to the next call, that we sat down and we took our time. And that's a really big piece that comes from leadership. So thank you for that.
And you mentioned community policing. I had always thought of community policing as foot patrols, or as the police doing sports leagues with kids, and that's all important and good. But community policing, when the officers are sitting with families or individuals who have been in crisis, recovering from crisis, then they're doing critical, important work every minute that they're out there as well. And
we teach in the crime prevention aspect that if we can look far upstream at what the root cause to cause the crisis or cause the behavior, that's a win. And then that's where you talk about crime prevention, that we can address it before it ever happens. And a lot of times it's really difficult because it's impossible to really have any kind of stats or numbers on something that didn't happen. But I know the officers love what they do and the fact that they're able to help people every day.
Yeah, we don't have stats on what didn't happen, but we do have stats that show actually Anne Arundel County's, while others have increased all categories of crime, we've actually had some declines, and it goes up and down at times, but and there's debate over that. But I did credit during those conversations what you do is a big part of that.
Thank you. And you're right. And when the numbers go down, we jokingly, when I talk to you monthly, is our warm line numbers usually go up. And so that a lot of times, we're averaging around 3,500 calls into the warm line. That's not talking about the follow-up that we do. But the fact is if people are reaching out for help, they're less likely to pillage the community or to do something if they're struggling with homelessness or food. They can call into the warm line and they can get connected. And what's really cool about it is no other county does it this way. An officer comes and bridges that gap, helps them get connected to the food bank, helps them get, connected to the resources they need. And I think that's a piece that the community doesn't realize, that what our CIT officers do above and beyond to help our community members who call into the warm line. And that's why it's great having them housed in our crisis system instead of us being housed at the police districts.
And then those, I know I'm not even letting you get to some of your other questions.
No, that's fine. This is great. No.
But then those officers and the whole department are integrated with the rest of county government and the services that we provide. And it just makes government work a whole lot better. I know in some places the police department is sort of like a separate institution, almost like the military is in the federal government. And here, there's constant interaction between the Department of Social Services and the police department and the housing authority and the police department. Everybody is communicating all the time around these individual cases.
I hear all the time when I go around the state of Maryland, because a lot of people want to replicate what we do and they come and visit. The first question they ask is, how did you get everybody to agree? And one of the keys is we all answer our phones for each other. So like you said, if someone from the Department of Social Service needs us, they're going to call Steve or I, and we're going to find out what's going on. If we have a situation and it includes a number of individuals, we're jumping on quickly onto a call. And the fact is, you don't see that in other jurisdictions where all of the county agencies are on board to kind of work together. And we saw that even during COVID. And that really is in part by you bringing everybody together and saying, hey, to fix these problems, we got to work together, right? Better place for all.
Yeah, and best place for all.
Best for all. Better. Best.
The best.
The best. There you go.
It's on the signs when you drive in. No, you mentioned COVID, and you said that it was me bringing people together, but in some ways COVID brought people together, that we opened up immediately. If you remember, it was scary at first. Nobody knew just how many lives would be lost, just how contagious it was. And the governor was calling the shots about stay-at-home orders and all that, but people were downright scared. And so we had calls flooding in, and we had at the Office of Emergency Management, we were taking calls, and we had volunteers coming in for that. And it increased the connection between people in the community and all of the county services, and then all of the agencies with each other. It was like having a crisis, an emergency. Emergency management is basically a coordinator of agencies, but we had that going on long term. And so things that were created during that time, like our food distribution system, we had a whole building, a whole hotel that we rented that was for housing for people that were not able to stay in congregate housing and shelters, and people who were, many of whom were in crisis. And that existed, and all the agencies, including you all, were there for that. So there was this buzz of activity to deal with, I think, problems that were already there, poverty, people's economic challenges, health challenges, and things that were already going on, but became much more visible during COVID.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize all of the work that went on behind the scenes from all of the agencies, like getting a hotel together so that we could have safety and not spread COVID further, and also make sure people who are struggling with homeless had a place to go. It was a long road, and we all had to pull together. And another one that I don't think people realize, I know there was a press conference at the time, but people don't realize what happened was your ability to help people with grief and loss and mental health, funding was able to come down, where we were getting calls in of people who were just scared and fearful and crying over loss of a loved one. And our ability to connect people to therapists and to resources to help them through those difficult times. Because while we want to be there to talk to them on the warm line, there's so many calls coming in that we want to make sure people get that ongoing help. And your office really helped with that.
Yeah, I remember early on that we were doing those weekly, I guess they were videos at first. Everything was virtual, with Health Officer Dr. Kalliana Rumman. But we did a lot on mental health at that time, and we knew that the mental health challenges from COVID would be huge, and recovery would be about mental health, and that sometimes during recovery is when it's most difficult. And that's exactly what we've seen, and you all have been there at every moment, helping to address those challenges. But we did put a lot of money in. We went from 4 CIT police officers to 8, right? And additional clinicians as well. And what we've found is that we have to continue the things from COVID that work and that are needed. And that's where we are right now, as I'm doing the budget, in fact, where things that were funded with federal money, we have to figure out which ones of them have to go to the general fund or some other revenue source to continue, so we don't just drop off.
And I think it's hard because it's that build it and they will come. And I think in building the resources during COVID, people still expect it. But a lot of the money during COVID is gone. And how do we keep this? Because we can't pull back now. We're helping so many people. And Steve can even talk to this, but it's just more and more the need. They call into the warm line instead of 911. There's more people asking for that CIT officer. And my feelings get hurt a little bit. I tell Steve, sometimes they want the officer and not the clinician, because especially on the kids side, they build a real rapport with an officer when they get to know them in a mentorship role. I think about the go-karting and the building of go-karts and the competitions that we've done, and fishing expeditions and things.
That was great, except when I went up against the chief.
I know. I still have it on video.
I think that whole thing was rigged. Her go-kart was so much faster than my go-kart.
Right. But the kids enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, the youth aspect of all this is also we haven't talked about yet, but the relationship with the school system I've watched evolve, partly because of some crises where there was a time where there wasn't great communication. It was hard to even get into the schools. I'm not supposed to be doing the interview, but I would love to hear your all's take on how that all came down.
We actually worked hand in hand with the school system and PPWs, again, during COVID, to check on children. We had CIT officers, we had our SROs, since schools were closed, that were working with us every day, that were going out for children that the school system, I don't want to say account for, but they may not have been in virtual learning. So those officers made the connection to the children and the families about what was going on. Did they need help with Wi-Fi? Was it an issue with their tablet? And we were able to fulfill that bridge and work hand in hand with the school system.
I remember hearing that you were actually going to kids' homes that the teachers were letting, that were AWOL, that they did.
We actually have a picture of a CIT officer on the hood of his car with with a computer trying to help the parent get linked. Because it was a safety check at first, right? Kid hadn't been on Zoom and they weren't sure what was going on, but ended up getting there and the parent feeling overwhelmed and just walking through that piece, the clinician being able to talk to the mom about feeling overwhelmed, and then the officer helping the child figure out how to get connected. Those are all little things that happen, that are important and I think help build. You're right. We used to not have a very good rapport with the schools, partly because, it's scary to bring us into their world. They want to help out. But what's been so amazing, I would say, over the last couple of years is just bringing it full circle, that we can be the eyes and ears for the school in the evening and then come in and share. And one of the big things, which I know Steve had a big part of, is Handle with Care, is when something happens in the community, we can notify the school and they're able to check on the child the next day. All of these things didn't happen before. So I think you're right. There's been some growth that has really happened along the way.
And I remember some of that happened. I think there was maybe a situation where there was a delay in getting into the school because the principal hadn't, there wasn't clear what the rules were, or whether to allow the police in, whether to allow the, mental health agency in. We have our own people who do that. But I remember that as a result of that, some members of the Board of Education and our staff both decided we needed to do a joint commission on mental health in the schools. And so your boss, Adrian Mickler, led it with Ryan Vogelin, who's from the school system. And I still get briefings from them on the work that they're doing, the recommendations. And they got the community involved in mental health for kids. And so there's a lot that's happening.
And I don't even know if you realize the positive thing that came out of that now is we have a system set up when something happens at night that we have people we can call, so that there's like a tree of people who can make calls to alert the appropriate people. So by the next day when school starts, the team is already ready and already available at the school. Their trauma team is available for the school, and then we have crisis people who come in for the teachers, because the teachers take care of the children, but who take care of the teachers. Right. And all of that came out of the development of just a communication with that, I don't know if you call it committee or organization.
Yeah.
So
task force.
Task force.
Yes,
that's the word. I knew there was a better word.
Yeah.
So, with Safe Stations assisting over 3,100 individuals coming in asking for help, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I get the data from you all about Safe Station participation. And then there's the other category. So there's the Safe Station where people can go to the fire station or the police station and when they're ready for help from addiction primarily, right? And that was started a long time before. It was before I came in. And then a new category is not the people who necessarily who maybe not be comfortable going to the fire station or the government institution, but just call, and then you meet them from the call to the warm line, I guess it is. You meet them somewhere in the community, and there's that category as well. And I think it's been different than most jurisdictions. I know it's been replicated by a lot. And it really is seems to me, that it's another tool, another pathway for people to get help when they need it. I think a lot of people have a little card with resources, and they know when they keep that with them, I think, and when they're in real trouble, they call.
The key is when earlier you talked about being that the police are part of the community. We're not working with the community, but we are part of the community. The unique thing is when the clinician and officer go together, and that officer becomes a social support for someone seeking recovery. And the goal for us is to be that support until we can link them back to their family and their pre-existing supports. That it shows that the police department is integrated into the community to be helpful when people need it the most.
You know, I haven't thought about it from the perspective of being the person who's calling much, because I haven't been lucky enough not to have to call. But as you're describing that, I'm realizing that for some people, if it were just a mental health counselor coming to the door, it wouldn't have the impact of having a police officer come to the door. And, you know, everybody's attitude about police officers is different based on their life experience. But when you're in crisis, to know the police it's like having a doctor come, when it makes you just immediately relax a little bit. And know that there's somebody in authority. Okay, so if you've been attacked or it's been a domestic violence or something like that, and there's a police officer there's, for a lot of people, a calming response to that. But then there's also, you know, the counselor who can really talk to you about, you know, is trained to talk to you about, you know, what's going on. So between the two, it's the perfect formula.
It really is. And the fact that police and fire open their doors to let people in until we can safely get there. Again, it's just that teamwork approach. All of these little things that we do, mental health, substance use, homelessness, it's all because someone opens their door and we look at the person and not the disease that they're struggling with. And that we were just at a conference speaking yesterday, Steve and I, and one of the things we said is, we're the county that doesn't say, I can't. We need everybody else out there to start doing the same and stop saying that I can't do that because of this, and start looking at it as, how do we make that change? And part of that, and I'm not doing it because you're sitting in front of me, because you know I say it all the time when I see you, support. You're so huge in giving support back, and you're always out there making sure you know what's going on with the community, whatever it may be. And that's one thing I say when I speak, when I go out to represent Anne Arundel County, is every year we change what our focus is depending on what the need of our community is. Can you talk a little bit about, as we're wrapping up, what would your vision be? You know, you've got these couple of years left. What's your vision for the crisis system, the police department, what we're doing? What would you like to see us doing next, or what is your vision within our program?
You know, I was intrigued hearing from Dr. George Everly about recovery from crisis, recovery from whatever disaster. He does this all around the world, United Nations, and he happens to live in Severna Park. And one of the things that he's talked about is taking the knowledge and the understanding of mental health challenges that you all have, and training as many people as possible to go as far as they can go in their understanding. And I know mental health first aid is taught to every police officer. Yep. And I would love for more and more people, whether it's people in education, people in other parts of county government, community leaders, neighborhood leaders, faith organizations, to get that kind of training, to broaden their understanding, so that when they are with a loved one, a friend, anybody who's experiencing challenges, they're just a little bit more sophisticated and wise about how to deal with it. So that's a big part of it. The other is you and I have talked about the mindset of fee for service, where, this is how Medicaid does things. You know, an ambulance comes, there's certain things are eligible for reimbursement, other things are not eligible for reimbursement. Y'all are a service, and it doesn't matter if people have health insurance. You take as much time as it takes. It doesn't have to check a box to get a fee. And that's what our healthcare system does. So I want to make sure that the world knows, other jurisdictions know, the state of Maryland knows how much more effective it is to do it the way you're doing it, where you are there for people and you can take the extra time, and it's not about each dollar of charge that you can get. So let's grow it.
Let's do it. I'm ready. Every day I'm thinking of how we can grow it, because that's my thing. What aren't we serving? What do we need to do better? Can we make it better? And you're right.
I also have to say that we have to make the jobs, particularly for the clinicians. I mean, police officers as well. I think we're doing better there in terms of compensation and benefits. But for your clinicians, they're not compensated well enough. They don't have the benefits that they should have. We have to make these jobs an option for young people to get into these careers.
Yeah, and I think I want to thank you. You said something earlier, and I didn't get to comment on it, but it really hit to my heart, is we don't thank our clinicians enough for the danger they go into. These aren't clinicians that are home doing therapy behind a screen. They go in every day not knowing what's behind that door for a well check. They don't know, and that's why I always say, don't take our officer away. We signed up to be social workers to help people, but we need officers on the call with us who are trained in behavioral health, but we need them there because we go in daily to places where there's weapons and there's dangerous situations, and people don't realize what these clinicians do in and day out to help. So I loved hearing that you want our officers there, because you're right. A domestic dispute is not easy to go into and diffuse, not for an officer and not for a clinician. So
we need our clinicians there where they're needed most.
Thank you.
And if I could add, I think we do a great job of having the right officers. And really, with the partnership of having officers integrated into the crisis system, it's more than a partnership, because we know how to communicate. And Jen and I have been on some tough calls together where we know what we're thinking without saying it. And it's the same thing with all the other pairs when we have officers integrated with the clinicians throughout the system. The familiarity is, we're so close. We know what we're doing together to be helpful.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. I like your vision.
All right. I like yours. Let's keep doing it.
That brings us to the end of this episode. A special thanks to County Executive Pittman for joining us during that riveting discussion on Anne Arundel County's crisis response system. We hope today's episode provided some critical information that may help you or a loved one.
We would like to take a moment to thank our listeners for joining us. If you or a loved one are experiencing a crisis, please contact the Anne Arundel County Crisis Response Warm Line at 410-768-5522. This number is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And remember, your actions may save a life. CIT Today was created by Steve Thomas and Jen Corbin. It was produced and recorded by Rich Herrard, researched, written, and edited by Justin Mulcahy and Steve Thomas. CIT Today is a product of the Anne Arundel County Police Department.